Well, thank you all for taking your time today. Do you want to do a little intro, Sam, before I jump in?
Sure, I'd be delighted, especially because I particularly signed up for this session to host it on purpose because I also wanted to be an attendee of it. I'm really pleased. I'm Samantha Becker. If you didn't catch me at any of the other sessions, I work for Arizona State University in the University Technology Office, and my team has been helping run the show with the Shaping EDU Winter Games. And we are just so elated that Dale and the University Design Institute said yes when we approached them about contributing to the Winter Games. And so I'm delighted to introduce to you today Dale Johnson, our Director of Digital Innovation for the University Design Institute at ASU for this, what's going to be a really insightful session about building collaborative MOOCs. Dale, take it away.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate the invite and the time that you're all investing in this. I'm going to move pretty quickly to see if we can get through. So we're in the track called Bobsleighing Tech Fears. It's the high-speed sport. I want to talk about an idea that I've been nurturing for a while, and I want to share with you so that if you have an interest in it as well, we can continue this conversation afterwards. I describe a global adaptive instructional network as a learning enterprise that we create a scalable and sustainable instructional infrastructure. So this is the goal of the enterprise. And what we really want to do is enable faculty to configure this network and use the network to personalize instruction for students. So that is the essence of what I'll be talking about today, and I'll do riffs off of this throughout. I really want to talk first about why we would want to embark on this global adaptive instructional network. Why would anyone throw themselves off a large mountain and go airborne and at high speed? Well, one of the first things that I want to talk about is what I think of as one of the challenges we face, which is that MOOCs have really become more like the McDonald's of higher ed, where a lot of people, millions and millions of people are served, but of some questionable educational value. We all know the statistics for completion rates, and we know the challenges when you're facing this kind of situation in education. So what I want to try to do is think a little bit about what comes after the MOOC, or how do we enhance the MOOC? There is a transformation that's underway in all our lives, has been for the last 25 years. We are moving from a mass production world to a mass personalization world. I still have about 300 CDs in a closet somewhere. I don't even know if I have a CD player anymore, but I've got 3 million songs on my phone. What about navigation? When I traveled the world in the 80s, I had to use maps everywhere I went. Now I've got a map of the world on my phone. When I worked in Vietnam in 2019, I could navigate anywhere in the country, and I don't speak the language and don't read the language. So we have seen this move from mass production to mass personalization in many, many aspects of our life. And now the challenge for us is, how do we move in education from mass production, where we're teaching the same lesson to all students at the same time? This is the new model now, mass personalization. We want to deliver the right lesson to the right student at the right time. When I think about this challenge that we face, it's really a very, very complex situation. We're facing the technology challenge, the pedagogy challenge, the cultural challenge in academia, financial challenge. How do we move from what we've been doing for 2,000 years, delivered to us initially by the Greeks and their amphitheaters, to something that has only been possible in the last 20 years? So we're talking about a 21st century model of mass personalization. So that is a contrast between what we've seen over the last 10 years in the MOOC world, where lesson plan's been fixed. In the Global Adaptive Instructional Network, it's variable. Presentation moves from group to individual, and content from common to personalized. So we're changing from a static to a dynamic world. This is not a critique of the MOOC as it's currently conceived, because that was the technology that was available to the people that were building them. But what we really want to think about is, what technology do we need to do something better? And that's where we're moving, away from the mass production MOOC to the mass personalization in the Global Adaptive Instructional Network. And the first thing I want to do is I want to dissect a little bit the term MOOC. When we think about massive open online courses, we think about open for students. But what this model is going to look at is how do we open that up for professors? How do we create an environment where we're not dealing with islands that are isolated any longer, where we've got collaboration between faculty members, where there is a network instructional infrastructure, where we can emulate the research scholar networks. In our research realm, we have literally dozens of networks in every discipline. So researchers can find each other. Well, we need to build that same kind of intellectual infrastructure for our teaching endeavors. And we want to build bridges to connect those courses. So the GAIN is a bridge that will allow us to connect all of those isolated courses. This is really the metaphor. We want to build this network so we can bridge multiple courses and create that infrastructure. Now, the challenge is we've got an antiquated publishing process. It's very much a feudal system, closed authoring model, high development costs, very slow revision cycle, limited adaptability. So that feudal model has run its course, and we need to think about something that's more democratic, more accessible, more equitable, more inclusive. So we need an agile publishing model, and the GAIN is that model. We want to be able to do open scholar sourcing. It's a term that I coined to capture the crowdsourcing idea with the scholars. So if we can scholar source our material, then we have a greater advantage and a larger pool of resources.
I love you so much.
Hey, Sam, can you mute? Good.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We love you too.
My husband just brought me egg rolls. Sorry.
Enjoy. The virtuous adoption cycle. We need to build something that will build on itself so we don't have to do so much sales and marketing. Some type of continuous improvement model and unlimited scalability. These are the cornerstones of a new publishing model. The heart of the matter, as I see it, is that when people started doing the course model, when they think of the MOOC and they think of the entity as a course, they were aiming at the wrong target. What we really want to focus on is lessons. The lesson is the more modular and measurable element of this model. Now, we've heard about micro-credentials. We've heard about the growth in all kinds of different certifications and different levels of instructional offerings. The lesson is the heart of all of those efforts. Without that model, we won't be able to successfully deliver on the promise of micro-credentials and other things. And we want to be able to configure them, right? We want faculty to be able to have flexibility so that they can adapt to their needs. So we're shattering the MOOC, we're dividing it up, and we're reassembling it. The last problem I want to highlight for MOOCs is this content confetti problem. This is another term that I coined because what we find in our world is unstructured content. If I Google translation in biology, I'm going to get 3.8 million Google hits on translation. I don't know if any of them are of quality or have the same focus that I have when I'm talking about translation in the process, in the biological process. So how do we think about that in a different way? We need to think about how we're going to measure learning outcomes better, how we can overcome the frustration of faculty when students are Googling everything or watching YouTube videos rather than reading the textbook and focusing on the lecture videos or coming to class even for the lecture. And finally, we want to reduce the cognitive load on students. Every time we introduce an alternative process like a YouTube search or a Google search, what we're doing is increasing cognitive load. So we're trying to figure out a way to keep students in the instructional system, and that would be in the GAIN in this case. So I want to highlight something here that President Michael Crow at Arizona State University has talked about. He calls this 5 realms of teaching and learning. This is almost impossible to read, and I realize that, so I'm just going to highlight them. Realm 1 is your traditional campus immersion. Realm 2 is the digital immersion, it's online learning. Realm 3 is the MOOC. Realm 4 is education through exploration. And today I'm focused on Realm 5, which is infinitely scalable learning. The Global Adaptive Instructional Network is focused on delivering this capability. How do we massively distribute personalized adaptive learning solutions? And that's what we'll be talking about for the rest of the time today. So what is this? Let me give you another idea of sort of where we're going here. I'm about to toss you down this slope and throw you airborne so you have some perspective on what it is. We've been working with adaptive systems at Arizona State since 2011. We've done a variety of different disciplines and a variety of different vendors. All this has given us perspective on the value of adaptive systems and the changes that are required, pedagogical changes, cultural changes, faculty development. Specifically, we started a project in 2017 we call the Biospine, where we prototyped the Global Adaptive Instructional Network. We took an adaptive platform, which was Cogbooks. We aligned the curriculum across all of these different courses from first year to fourth year, integrated the content. So there were about a dozen faculty teams, each between 5 and 7 faculty members working on aligning curriculum, integrating content, coordinating the course material, developing formative assessment, and coming up with measurable outcomes. This served as a roadmap for the game. What we did here was really kind of a collaborative MOOC. And what I want to talk about is how do we extend that into a more nimble environment and open it up to the rest of the world? Because for us, the technology is giving us new insight. I'll give you an example of college algebra. We have approximately 10,000 students per year in this course. Up until 2015 or so, we were living in a black box world. We couldn't answer basic questions about our students, like who needs help and what do they need help with. So we had to tear the cover off of that black box. We used software called Alex from McGraw-Hill. And the first thing it did for us is it allowed us to organize the class. We had a team of 6 math professors who worked on the curriculum, and they configured that. There were about 370 lessons in that curriculum for college algebra. And this is one semester from August to December. We saw right away in the initial knowledge check that students start at different places. So we have to start thinking about our instruction differently. You know, some students go from 0 to hero in one semester. We really celebrate these students. They work hard, they stay at the task, and they succeed. Other students come in and they're already halfway done with the course. So we cannot teach these two students the same way. We were living in a world for the last 2,000 years where we had no alternative but to give them the same lecture on the same day. But today we have an alternative, and this is in the form of Alex or our Biospine or other adaptive courseware we've developed. So this student actually takes the final exam in the 1st of October. We don't make them wait until December because they're done. They successfully mastered the course material. And then of course we have students like this that struggle. They do well for a while and then they flatline. So we are really focused on using the technology to find these students and to provide them with personalized instruction. That's the goal of all of this technology, you know, build that infrastructure so that we can get the results. And this is an example of our results. In 2016, we implemented Alex, and you can see we had been stuck in around 60% success rate for our students. That's a grade of C or better for almost a decade. And when we began this new mass personalization process, our results started to go up, and we're up 17 percentage points. Plus we've got additional instructional innovations that we've added here. Our success rate for a student that starts in the fall, by May of the following year, is almost 90%. So we're pushing the envelope of innovation to come up with ways to help these students succeed. What I want to do now is I want to talk about how we do that. So how would you get down that slope, launch yourself in the air, and successfully land to have the highest impact on the instructional process? This is really about Web 2.0. I hope that term resonates with some of you. Web 2.0 is shorthand for platforms that crowdsource their material. Uh, Airbnb is a great example. I'm a frequent user. They are the largest hospitality company and they own none of their own rooms. Spotify, largest music platform, owns none of its own content. Facebook, obviously, largest media company, none of its own media. And the Global Adaptive Instructional Network will become the world's largest resource publisher, but will not own any of its own content. This is a classic Web 2.0 structure. That's what we're trying to build. We're talking about dynamic platforms like Wikipedia, not static courses. We want the enterprise to continuously improve. We want to scholar source content, like YouTube sources all of their content from us. We want to encourage academic networks like HNet. We want to bring these professors together in a way that helps them focus on the maximum instructional impact. How do they share those ideas? And then I use the Apple example as a strive for simplicity. We have to be able to do this without a lot of overhead. If it takes time to explain, it's probably not going to be adopted. So we're looking at curriculum and content, commerce, community, and creativity to organize the Global Adaptive Instructional Network. But what are we talking about here? It's not magic. When we think about adaptivity, there are two things that are adapting to a student: lesson sequence and resource selection. The lesson sequence, I'll talk more about in a minute, and resource selection as well. But the second question that follows most conversations I have about adaptive systems is, what's actually guiding that? Well, we've got 4 techniques that we've encountered in our work with adaptive systems. Everyone thinks about the algorithm first. People talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning. They talk about this recommendation engine, but that's the hardest to develop and deliver. It took the Alex team almost 20 years to get to a point where they had a reliable predictive analytics tool in their system. So in the meantime, while we're building towards an algorithm, we're talking about assessment, rapid remediation. If you get something wrong, you get more content. You can get a recommendation for additional videos, etc. Association, there's a network of knowledge that's built, and that network is a living thing. It's not a static entity. And agency, where the student feedback is captured continuously so that we can improve the recommendation. Is that video helpful? Yes or no? Is this reading useful? Yes or no? We want that loop, that agency loop, so students can influence the recommendations. Now, all of this depends upon what I call the ed molecule. These are 3 elements that have been referred over the last 40 years to in a variety of different ways. I think about it as 3 atoms here: the learning objective, the instructional resources, and the assessment activities, all linked together to form a lesson. This becomes that building block that I was talking about earlier. When we focus at this level, we can measure and manage our instructional impact. That ed molecule then, and that lesson structure, can be built into networks. So we talk about a network being something that is continuous. It's not a single static entity. It is a living environment. That ecosystem is going to be critical for configuring courses. In the case of Alex, when we entered the ecosystem that we wanted, the 370 lessons, that configured algebra within a larger spectrum of mathematics. So building that network takes time. That's why it's important that it be a community activity. We're also talking about a 3-dimensional environment. If you think about a syllabus as a 2-dimensional plan for a course, what we're talking about is stacking syllabi across multiple courses. That's what we did in the Biospine. So if a student struggles with a lesson, you can go back and remediate, because all of these lessons are networked into the system. So you can help them recover their knowledge and successfully move on. This is one of the biggest advantages of an adaptive network. In the case of Alex, when we configured college algebra, we also included math back to 9th grade in the United States system. So we had literally 4 years of mathematics there for remediation to support. So you have to start thinking about the world in 3 dimensions, and we have to break out of that 2-dimensional plane that we've been using forever in our syllabus model. The adaptive network really starts as the core for faculty. This is where they can lay out their syllabus. They can put in their lessons into the library. Then they're going to configure or create and curate content. This could be videos, it could be writing, could be an exercise, could be an explorational activity. Anything you could imagine can be included in the content library through the Ed molecule. Then they configure the course they want. So you might still have different physics courses. And at Arizona State, we actually have 4 different first-year physics courses. Physics for the physics majors and physics for the history majors are dramatically different. But you could pull from the same network of knowledge to develop those different courses. And then finally, you're into the course and you have 3 major steps here. You have pre-assessment, figure out where the students are in their current learning, adaptive instruction, and final assessment. You have to be able to have academic integrity. So we want to be able to say students have mastered these lessons that we've developed. All of that gets compiled into the structure that the student experiences. And the student doesn't care about any of this. All of this is irrelevant for them. They only care about, give me the right lesson right now so that I can do well on the assessment. They're laser focused on the objective at hand because they may be juggling 5 other courses. So how do we help them when we think about taking that library, providing the recommendations, and personalizing that lesson along with the instructional resources? So this complex network that we build is all designed to do this, to deliver the right lesson to the right student at the right time. The infrastructure we need for that includes the heart of this, which is all of the adaptive analytics, the Ed molecules, the association network, and then we need the tools to engage with that heart. So we have content curation, course configuration as componentry, and then on the other side, we have the student user experience and the instructor user experience. And these are the fundamental building blocks of the Global Adaptive Instructional Network. We want to build out this infrastructure. So now I want to shift a little bit to the question of, well, where would we use this? Because that's really the pedagogical challenge we face. And for us at Arizona State, it's been in this flipped, blended, or hybrid model. This is what we discovered when we started using this in the sciences. We did biology and chemistry, physics, and we found that for us, the adaptive instructional network is really good at low-level blooms. There's a huge value to having a student looking at this instructional material at that level. That frees up time in class to do higher order thinking. And this is the quintessential flipped model. So here we have in our pedagogy now a structure that allows us to enhance the educational experience. This is really an optimization. We want to optimize our technology and our teaching. So we have adaptive technology and active teaching. This is what the learning scientists tell us we should be doing, and now we have tools to liberate us from the lecture and give us those flexibilities. For the professors, we try to create something that is recognizable, and the students. So information acquisition and assessment, this is a formative assessment, occur in the adaptive instructional system. Then we get to the classroom experience. So here's where we're applying this, and we're doing it in case studies, small group work, things like that, where we can engage with the students and help them learn those higher order thinking skills. We talk about the professional skills like collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking. If we're going to give them a chance to learn those skills, it has to occur here. We have to develop this approach. And then finally, there's a 4th step, we call it assimilation, where the students are asked to integrate what they've learned into their own knowledge. We can put this together in a course that's familiar. So it's not so threatening to a professor or a student, because each week you could have a different theme. Now, what the adaptive component does is it gets everybody ready when they get to class. That's our goal. Everybody has to show up ready to talk about genetics or evolution or human body. And the faculty member writes the exercise or the case method so that they will get the kind of maximization of active learning. This is really a symbiotic relationship between the technology and the teaching. So we're bringing together the best of both, trying to find the right tool for the right job here to help the students learn. But this course structure has worked well for us. And a good example is biology. This is an intro biology class at Arizona State, about 1,200 students a year. We used to have a really high withdrawal rate. You'll notice it was as high as 20% in spring of 2015. When we went into this new model, we found that dropped dramatically to less than 2%. So we started looking at why that might have happened. And the primary hypothesis we have is because of the active learning. The social networks that students form when they're in their small groups of 6 are so strong that they help them weather the storm when the things get tough. And in every science class, there's always a rough spot where you have to learn something that's really challenging. So these small teams form a natural social network. And that's what we want to reinforce. Then we also found that the results on the exams and the final outcome of the course were much higher, significantly higher. We attribute that to the adaptive systems because students can go back and watch the lecture repeatedly. It's videotaped, so they can watch it 3 or 4 times, and they do. And we see this. The data shows us that they are replaying the lecture. So giving them an opportunity to integrate and assimilate that knowledge on their own time, not rushed through a 50-minute lecture, has tremendous value when they get into the assessment and examination process. So why don't we talk a little bit about who would want to do this now? Because if you're going to throw yourself off a mountain at 65 miles an hour and fly through the air to hopefully land safely, you really want to be making that decision in an informed way. So what we think about first in this who question is who needs to get paid in order to play in this model? And we need to have an incentive structure that incentivizes management, resource acquisition, and technology. So we think about this as 3 different players in the financial structure of the Global Adaptive Instructional Network. There needs to be a management component. Somebody's going to have to run the operation, make sure that the bills are paid and people are participating in a positive way. Faculty will develop the instructional resources through the scholar sourcing approach. And we need vendors who will support the technology and create this open instructional network so that these contributions from faculty can be integrated. I want to highlight here, though, that open does not mean free. I was working at a startup in 1999 during the dot-com boom, and one of my lead programmers was promoting Linux. I said, this is great, save us lots of money. We'd love to, to use that as our operating system. And he reminded me that open is not free. You may use an open source software, but you may still need support services. And you certainly need programming and other ancillary infrastructure. So we want to be able to reward people and have an economic model that balances the enterprise. So we need startup capital. We need to think about those resources for the scholars who are participating. Management, some type of public benefits corporation, which would allow us to avoid the problems we have when companies that go from publicly held to privately held back to publicly held, and then maybe even go out of business or go bankrupt. We're trying to create stability here. We need something that'll last for the next 100 years so that we don't have the pressures of the marketplace constantly throttling the companies back and forth in and out of the space. And we need technology providers. Eventually, we need a revenue model, something like this $30 per course per student that would be divided up hypothetically between the different financial interests. So faculty member royalty rates at 30%, management cost, another 30% of that, and technology platform, another 30% with 10% for innovation. This is just an idea. Obviously, these numbers would have to adapt to reality. But what I think is we can start to build an economic model that supports a stable enterprise so that we will have a service. This gain will be available for us. You might say that's crazy, it'll never work, but it's already working. For some of you, you may be familiar with Teachers Pay Teachers. This was a K-12 innovation that launched a few years ago, and they are generating millions of dollars for their participants, their scholars. What they're doing is scholar sourcing the K-12 market. So a fourth grade teacher doing a civics lesson can post those lesson materials, and another fourth grade teacher somewhere else can buy them. So they form a marketplace, and this marketplace is successful. So we're really emulating the successful markets. And another one recently launched, coursehero. coursehero is going to provide a marketplace for the faculty to share their content and for students to buy it. And this is going to be a disintermediation in the market, right? We're going to see that you don't need a textbook publisher any longer if you can directly sell to students. Or the publishing model will change dramatically in order to enable this kind of relationship. So here we're facing now all kinds of innovations, all kinds of opportunities. We are really struggling to figure out, how do we invent this future? I love this quote from Alan Kay: the best way to predict the future is to invent it. So as we think about the Global Adaptive Instructional Network, we want to come up with a way to invent this future and to build this instructional infrastructure for our faculty and our students so they can be successful. So I'll pause there and take questions. Hopefully I left a little bit of time. Yeah, about 13 minutes, I think, until we're done. And hopefully you've already had some good chats. I haven't been able to keep up with the chat, but I'll look forward to discussing this in more detail and answering your questions. And Sam, do you want to moderate?
I'm looking. There's lots of great comments. I don't see any questions at this time, but I'm going to be looking out for them. Oh, we have a question, raised hand. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Dale, this is amazing. It's exactly what I was hoping to see here. I have a question about the social aspect of the learning environment. And I'm curious what you might suggest. You mentioned the social component that might be the glue that holds students in these classes and increases retention at that active learning phase. But so my research, I'm looking at that teacher-student relationship quality, and it seems like, especially in younger ages, but certainly at all ages, that's a big component of what drives motivation. That bond, the sense of expectation, wanting to do well, and kind of for a teacher, and having the teacher be encouraging. What is there a risk of that being missing a bit as this kind of fully distributed platform that you're talking about comes up? And is there a way to bring it back in a way that's manageable to take advantage of that customization and the personalization you're talking about?
Yeah, let me break this down into two different questions because this is a great one. I love this conversation. First, I want to talk about this idea of an instructional component and an application component in education. That's the adaptive active model. So if you think about that, I was really describing the on-campus world where we have adaptive system, but then they come to class. There's also an online version of this where we would have adaptive instruction, but they would be involved in some kind of group activity, synchronous or asynchronous, online. So that's one challenge for us. I call that a 2x2 matrix. So you've got 4 quadrants, and the quadrant with the biggest question mark is online active learning. So how do we think about new tools and techniques? The gain is not going to do that. I want to be clear. We don't want to try and use the same tool for every problem. The active learning online is a unique challenge. So we have unique tools for that, and like Piazza or even Facebook groups for some classes, and Slack, and we're using all types of different tools. There may be another generation of tools coming to help us with that challenge. Then I want to go back to the question about the social network component. The problem that we were trying to solve at Arizona State was a large lecture course problem. These are first year courses for general science credit. So we have lectures of 450 students. Now there is a great wall that exists between the professor and the student in that model. And it's that fear that the students have of exposing themselves in that social environment to ridicule or humiliation if they ask a question in front of 449 classmates. So what we found was when we went to this active learning model and we put students in groups of 6 and we put them in a flat floor classroom, the professor is walking around. Now the risk of humiliation and embarrassment goes down dramatically, because if you ask a question, only 5 other people are going to hear it. There's going to be a conversation. You can be shy, but you can engage your professor at a human level. And that's what the professors told us, was now they know their students. Before, they were facing this giant wall of anonymity in the large lecture halls. Today, they get to know the students individually. So that's part of the social network component, not just the classmates collaborating, but also the professors now are closer to the students physically and intellectually and educationally. And I think there's a benefit there that probably needs to be studied, right? What's the kind of corollary benefit of active learning in small groups that is a social component?
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Great question. And thank you so much, Dale. We've got another one. Well, actually, I should say it's more like two, a twofer from Paul. Two interrelated questions. What are the greatest barriers to going where you're proposing we go with MOOCs? And what could we do both individually and collaboratively to overcome those barriers?
So we have a startup challenge. This is going to be a capital investment challenge. When you think about something like Khan Academy, it took a decade for Sal Khan to grow. And during that time, he was receiving large investments from foundations, from corporations, from individuals. All of that money is important to get started. The second thing we need is we need to think about this as a community. So in addition to capital, we have to have community. And the community component is going to be the thought leaders, those entrepreneurial educators who are willing to go in and start contributing content, configuring their courses, building that structure. The way I think about it is we're going to have to tap the existing environments. We're going to need to have professional associations, the American Historical Association or the Sociological Scholars Associations. All of these professional associations are existing networks of communities, and we need to tap into those. And then the third piece is really the technology partner. I think that this is one of those conundrums I've struggled with. Is it something that we could bootstrap and try to build out over time, or is it something that's going to require a mega corporation to come in and subcontract out? I've worked with startups. We've done a lot of work with them, and they're always precariously balanced on the edge of a razor to survive. And we've worked with the mega publishers, the McGraw-Hills and the Pearsons and the others, Cengage. So, finding the right partner there is going to be critical. So those are the three things I think that are the cornerstones of getting a global adaptive instructional network off the ground.
Thanks, Dale. Great set of questions, Paul. Any final call for questions before we get ready to go to lunch?
Marilyn had a call.
Go for it.
Go, Marilyn. Unmute, Marilyn.
One of my questions in what you're talking about is I can see with things like Biospine and Alex, a huge amount of work went into looking at the whole curriculum, having a way to assess and analyze the analytics. So if someone doesn't reach a certain threshold, they take this branch or that branch. But I'm having a really hard time thinking about the model of, okay, a bunch of faculty can contribute to some repository, just like Airbnb contributes rooms or Spotify contributes something, which I think is kind of a simple concept, like a song. I'm wondering how that can all work together in this adaptive framework.
Yeah, great question. I think about this as a biological metaphor. After spending 3 years working closely with the biology faculty, what we're trying to create is an environment where faculty can thrive. If we are successful and they are contributing lessons and they are getting paid royalties, then they will continue to promote and encourage and expand their participation in that of others. That's the educational entrepreneur that we're searching for. The fear we have, and I share this fear, is that if we build it, no one will come. Like, oh, great idea, but there's no real reason to do that. And that's why I emphasize the incentive model. We have to create a reason for faculty members to contribute their intellectual property. On the research side, we have patents, we have royalties, we have copyrights. We've got all of that on one side of the house. And what we really need on the other side is we need a way to monetize our instructional infrastructure. That's where we break from the old publishing model and we create this new network. If we get that right, then I think it will grow organically. And it's like the other Web 2.0 models. Not every one of these is going to succeed. There are lots of wrecked Web 2.0 companies on the scrap heap of history, but we only need one winner. Eventually, we only need one network that can accommodate all of those educational entrepreneurs.
Great question, Marilyn, and good to see you. Thank you so much, Dale. I think we have time for one final question. Jing, do you want to come on and ask it?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So I have a question. So it's about the popular courses in public schools. For example, in UC Berkeley, usually they have 200 students in the big classroom. So how to balance these kind of personalization and the teacher workload? Do we use like a chatbot, or a teaching assistant, electrical teacher assistant to support the students more? Or in these like adaptive MOOC? Yeah, you mentioned like a group of 6 students, but 200 students, that's like a 30 group or maybe even more, how to handle that.
So there are examples where faculty members have been teaching in large lecture environments, and Scott Freeman, the University of Washington biology professor, has been documenting his experience with active learning in large lecture halls for a decade. He's done a great body of work on that, Scott Freeman. The challenge, I think, is the one you're describing, is creating maybe a layer of learning assistance. We do this at Arizona State. Within the active learning classroom, we hire upper division undergraduate students to work with the first year students. So we have a mentoring model. And in that classroom where we have the groups of 6, we might have 75 students broken down into 13 groups of 6. We're going to have 4 or 5 third year or fourth year students walking around engaging with our first year students. That creates another layer of support that isn't very costly. Everyone has teaching assistants and instructional assistants in their existing courses. So we're repurposing them as these, we think of them as coaches or mentors at that level. And that helps the professor manage that workload. I've seen a professor in biology delegate down dramatically, delegate a whole bunch of work to these students, even to the level of, why don't you go and think of a new lesson that would be more interesting to the students on this topic? And I've seen third year students come up with great ideas. So we're tapping a huge reserve of creativity if we can engage those upper division, third and fourth year students in this endeavor as well. Those are pedagogical questions that come up, as the change in the model to a flipped course starts to take root. you start hearing those questions from professors. How do I get more help in the classroom?
Hey, thanks,
Cool.
Dale.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jing, too. Great question. Fantastic set of questions here from this audience today. I have to thank everyone so much for coming and engaging. Dale, on behalf of Shaping EDU, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. We've recorded this, as you've noted, and the recording will be going up on the Shaping EDU YouTube channel and also being posted to the Winter Games website. And right now we're about to all head to Olympic Stadium for a Productively Yours lunch where we talk about the outcomes of hackathons. So I hope to see all of you there. If not, please join us fireside at 2 p.m. And also at 4 p.m. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.